Hi, it's Martin here with Wintrust Mortgage. So, as a lender and as a realtor, one of our key objectives is always to bring value, to add value to our clients, not only value through the service and the product offerings that we provide them, but also to help them identify where they can find the best value. Often, as a realtor, you may be showing people two or three or five or more houses, and they often look to you and say, "Well, gosh, well, I like three of these. Which do you think is best?" And as a realtor, a lot of times, you might get into a conversation about what's important to them, and you may have a process by with which you help them filter down exactly what is the right property for them, and that's one way that you bring value to them. But you're also helping them find value in that specific property. So one of the things I want to talk with you about is how do we find value or add value when there is a seller's contribution, and there's different ways that we can utilize money from a seller. I think one of the big things we identified here in 2022 was that as we closed out this past year, a 2-1 buy down became the buzzword. And it's something that's been around for a long time, but many people had not heard of it. So we're looking at, do we do a contribution where we either reduce the sales price, or do we help a buyer in using a temporary buy down, like a 2-1 buy down or something like that? How do we determine what is the highest and best use? Where do we find the value on that? So I want to take a minute to show you a comparison that you might find helpful for you and your clients in determining what's the best use of a seller's funds or seller's contribution in a real estate transaction. Should we look at reducing the sales price? Should we look at pitching in money to help with closing costs? Should we look at a temporary buy down, or should we look at a permanent buy down? There's four key and distinct options that can be really analyzed. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you to the computer model and show you an exact sample and a model of an actual case study that we did. And I hope you find this to be helpful for you and your clients. Okay, so let's take a look at this model, this example that I have set up on the screen here. And this is based on a purchase price of $760,000. And in this particular example, the buyer was initially asking for a $20,000 price reduction, and the seller came back down offering a $15,000 contribution. And the question is, well, what's the best use of that? Do we want to do a price reduction of $15,000 or do something else with that money? Now, keep in mind that in this example, I've got a $15,000 price reduction shown here in the bottom left of the screen here in red. But the cost of the buy down, whether we do a permanent buy down, is $14,500 or a temporary buy down at $14,500. That was about the same. So you can see it's a $500 difference, not a huge variation, but sometimes you could have a bigger spread between these numbers where maybe you're comparing a $20,000 price reduction versus a $15,000 buy down of points and what have you for the buyer. And the other option that's not shown on the screen here is just a straight out paying of closing costs. You could have the $15,000 applied towards closing costs. It's not illustrated here because that's pretty self-explanatory. It's basically the first column here, which is 30-year fix, except the closing costs are paid for. But let's go through this one by one because I think you'll find this very helpful. And if you need to analyze any of your transactions, let me know because I can run it through this software and look at that for you and your clients, whether you're representing the buyer or the seller, because sometimes it's important for the seller to see how they might be able to better attract the buyer by understanding how their dollars can influence the transaction. So the first column here we have is the 30-year fix. That's basically what it would be set up as if we did a $760,000 purchase price, down payment to $152,000. We have an interest rate here of 6.75, and that monthly payment is $39.43. Okay, pretty self-explanatory. Now, if the seller agrees to reduce the price by $15,000, what does that mean to our buyer? Well, instead of doing $152,000 down, they're only doing $149,000 down. It's the same interest rate. The payment is $38.66, where before it was $39.43. So again, that's a pretty good deal. That's a good reduction in the right direction. So a price reduction, there's nothing wrong with that. It's good. But if we're looking at maximizing the use of those funds for our buyer, well, we might want to look at keeping the sales price at $760, and that means our loan amount remains at $608, but getting a lower interest rate by buying down the rate by paying 2 points. That's what a permanent buy down would do. And that means that the monthly payment for this borrower is $36.94. Okay, now that's a lot lower than paying 38.66. So I think this is definitely a good solution. It's probably the best solution right now to look at this. And then we have our fourth and final solution here, which is to do a temporary buy down. So a temporary buy down, we use the seller's funds, the same 14,500, to give a temporary reduction on the interest rate, where the first year's interest rate is not 6.75, but it's actually based at 4.75, and that brings that mortgage payment down to 31.72. When you compare that mortgage payment to all the other mortgage payments on that line, that is the lowest payment, but that's only for 2 years. I would only do this temporary buy down if we believe that mortgage rates are going to be coming down, and coming down to a low enough amount that after 2 years or before the 2 years expires, that the buyer can then refinance their home loan and get the long-term interest rate at a lower payment. Okay, so whether you're looking at buying down permanently or temporary, these two seem to be the best options. Now, if I scroll down here, I can graph this out and show you what happens over a 2-year run. Again, the temporary buy down over 2 years means that the purchaser, the buyer, has spent $103,000, versus if we just did the price reduction, they would have spent $115,000, or permanent buy down at 111. Okay. One thing I want to share with you, which is unique to the temporary buy down, is if the buyer refinances the home before the end of the second year, before their interest rate moves up into the permanent category, the money that's left on the table from that 14,500 that was not spent can be used and applied to do a principal reduction. So in other words, it pays for the refinance of the borrower. So if the borrower was to refinance a year, maybe a year and a half later after buying the house, and let's say there's $4,000 or $5,000 left over from the initial 14,500, we can actually apply that money to cover the cost of their refi in the future. So that's why I'm a big fan of looking at a 2-1 buy down right here, because I believe that if they do a 2-1 buy down, they get into the house at a lower rate, they lock in the sales price. Yeah, the price is at $760,000, but they take the $14,500 to get a lower rate, and then if there's money left over, you use that money to pay for the refi when mortgage rates come back down. And this chart here shows you the green line showing that the 2-1 buy down is the favored and the most economical solution for both buyer and seller. Again, sorry for the long presentation, but I wanted to show you this tool because it's really helpful to identify how we add value to our clients, whether it's a buyer or seller. If you have a transaction that you're going through and you're trying to be creative and trying to find a way to come up with a good offer, give me a call and we can look at these numbers and see what's the best way to go and try to strategize for the optimal solution. All right. Thank you for your time. I hope this was helpful. We'll be in touch. Bye-bye.